Last week we were in Mark chapter 1. This week we jump to Mark chapter 9. It's one of those times in the church year where the event for the time of the year sort of breaks into the sequence of the lectionary. In this case, the Transfiguration is that event. At the end of the season of Epiphany, that aha moment when something is revealed or when it becomes clear, we have this sort of ultimate clarification, this moment when it couldn't be made more clear, really. But we are 8 chapters later. Last week we read from chapter 1, this week is chapter 9. So just a quick recap and settling into the narrative as we take a look at our passage for today. Jesus has continued teaching and healing and moving around. He's been on that tour around Galilee, then back to Capernaum, to the sea, up a mountain, back home, across the sea to the land of the Gerasenes, back across the sea again, back home again, to a deserted place, and then over to Gennesaret and Tyre and Sidon, Decapolis, Damatha, Bethsaida, Caesarea Philippi, and now we're climbing up a mountain again. Along the way, Jesus has taught in parables and proclaimed the good news, healed a lot of people, walked on water and fed both the crowd of 5,000 and the crowd of 4,000. And this passage starts 6 days after something. That's how our passage for this week begins, 6 days later. The something, this is 6 days later then, is Peter's declaration of faith and the rebuke that followed. Peter declared Jesus to be the Messiah. But then when Jesus started talking about what that meant, suffering and dying and being raised again, Peter wouldn't hear of it. This must never happen to you. To which Jesus replied, "Get behind me, Satan. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." That encounter. And 6 days later, we're here. They go away to a place by themselves on the mountain. Peter and James and John and Jesus. Now you might ask, why all this context? It's the Transfiguration after all. Maybe just let that be a standalone story. It's been 6 whole days. It's a new week and a new lesson. Why retell this declaration of Peter from a week before this story even takes place? Because it's only been 6 days, and that exchange was significant. How many of you can remember something someone said to you last year that was impactful? Maybe good or bad or even hurtful, but something that stood out, something that you can almost hear word for word again. Now, some of you might be remembering something from 10 years ago, let alone 1 year ago. And this wasn't a year ago or 10 years ago. This was last week. Peter had said to Jesus, "You are the Messiah." And then when Jesus started to explain what his mission would include, Peter said, "No, that can't happen." Almost kind of like, "Wait, let me tell you what it means to be the Messiah, Jesus." No, Peter, listen to him. That listen to him we hear on the mountain could simply be a stopping of that exchange there, a word of comfort as Peter nervously starts talking and trying to figure out what they should do. It might also be a little more comprehensive. And it might be something for us to learn from too. How often do we try to say what God is or what God should do? We talked about this a little bit last week, a week ago. Different story, similar lesson. The Son of Man must undergo great suffering and die, and 3 days later rise again. 6 days before this, Peter said this must never happen to Jesus, the Messiah, suffer and die. And now he wants to build 3 dwelling places, 3 places for them to stay on the mountain, to maybe not go back down and face what comes next, to skip. Jesus, you are the Messiah, but wait, Jesus, let me tell you what that means. No, listen. Listen to him. We're at the last week before Lent begins, and we don't get to skip this part either. It's not Jesus is born and then Christ is risen. There is so much that happens in between Christmas and Easter. A whole life. The life Jesus lived, that we get to learn from and listen to and hear the lessons Jesus has to teach us about everything. How to live, the power and the challenge of our faith, the way things can be, the way they are, and what it takes to move from one to the next. Jesus teaches us about God, about the world, about ourselves. Life, really. The Gospel of Mark does move quickly from one event or lesson to the next, but those events and lessons are still there, and they are significant. We don't get to skip this part. Listen to him. Listen to Jesus. Amen.